In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a simple and effective data entry form for Excel using Python. Now we'll be using the openpyxl library to work with Excel files and Tkinter to build the form interface. I'll walk you through each step clearly, and along the way I'll share practical techniques for writing clean and efficient code that you can apply to your own projects. My name is Paul Kelly. I'm a multiple recipient of the Microsoft MVP Award, and I've spent many years helping people write code to automate Excel workflows. By the end of this video, you'll have a working data entry form and a solid understanding of how to use Python with Excel files. Let's get started. Let's start by taking a look at the application which we will be building. Now you can see the list of records that we have here, and these records are taken from our worksheet. So the worksheet is basically where we're storing our records, and then we use this front end as the data entry, because obviously we don't want people going in and just manually changing stuff. We want to do it through an application. So what we can do with this application is that we could delete an item if we wanted. So for example, if we select Corey and then we click on delete, you can see that that's now deleted. And so this will also delete the record in the underlying file. So this record will get deleted, and then our file will look like this. Now we can also add records here. So for example, I can just add something here. I can say Fred, and I can say Flint, Stone, and just pick a department. Let's say marketing, and let's make him part-time. And so if we do this and then we click on insert, you can see that he's appeared at the bottom of our list. Now this will also update the file. And so our file will look exactly like this after we add the record. Now we can also update a record. So let's take Troy Nelson, who is full-time and works in HR. And if we select edit, what you'll see is that his details appear over here. And now you can see that the button is changed to update. So let's change from HR to IT. And let's change him from full-time to part-time. And if we click on update, what you'll see is that Troy has changed. He's now part-time in IT. And underneath, our file will change as well. So this is like a very standard data entry application. Now just up on the top right-hand side, what I have here is a combo box. And this basically demonstrates the different themes that are available within the TTK Bootstrap package. And so what we do is we can select it from here. We can select the one that we want to use. And so I'm using Superhero, but imagine we pick Cosmo. You can see that that's a much lighter theme. So when we pick one of these themes, what happens is all the different buttons and controls have colors specific to it. So let's try a different one. We'll try United, for example. You can see that the buttons in United are orange. And you can see if we go to darkly, it's another dark type. So you can pick whichever one that you want to use. So this is just to demonstrate how to use different themes. So now that we understand exactly what we're building, let's go ahead and write the code. And what I'm using today is Visual Studio Code, or VS Code as it's called. And this is a lightweight development environment. It's one of the most popular ones out there and is owned by Microsoft, and it's free to download and use. Now the Python install I have today is called Anaconda, and this installs lots of useful packages, particularly if you're coming from a data analysis background, or that's what you plan to do with Python. So now we know about that, let's go ahead and get started. What we've got here is we've got our Explorer, and if we open our Explorer and we click on the new file icon, and then we just type in the name of the new file, and we add a py extension so it'll be recognized as a Python file. Now we're going to create a user form, or the equivalent in Python. So I'm going to write this code as a class because it just makes it more neat and more easier to get around. Now, if you're not familiar with classes, don't worry, because basically a user form in VBA is basically a class anyway, and this has got lots of similarities. So the first thing in our class, in a user form, we've got initialization is the first function that runs when we create an instance of our user form. And we've got a similar thing in Python, but it's called a init. And does exactly the same thing. It runs when an instance of our user form is created. So what we want to put in here is we want to build our controls at this point. So we say build controls. So this is a function that we're just about to create. We haven't created it yet. So to create the function, then we do def build controls and we put in our colon. And then we put in whatever we're going to write next. The first thing we want to do is create the actual form itself. So we do self form main, and that's the name we're going to give it. So the reason we use self here, self refers to the user form. It's like me in VBA. And self is basically saying I'm creating this as part of the class and it will be available to any other function in the class. And we say TK. So TK is the package we're using. And the package is Tkinter. And this is included with Python, and it's one of the oldest packages, but it's good when you're starting off. Now, one thing you might find strange is that it doesn't have a drag and drop GUI. So everything we do it in the code. Now, the advantage of this is that if there's any settings or something, they're all in the code. Whereas with VBA, sometimes you can accidentally do something with a setting on a user form and it can cause you problems. But here, everything is in the code. And a second advantage is that I can create a user form with code and I can send that code to you and you can just run the code and it will just run the user form. Whereas with VBA, we've got to send somebody the actual user form. So that's just a couple of things to keep in mind when we do this. Now, if you're going to do you want to create more professional apps in the future, there are different packages that do have drag and drop, but this is a good place to start with Python. So we import the library anyway, import tkinter as tk, and then we call the tk function, so tk, and that basically creates our user form. And we can set the title. Now, for all these functions, we should be passing in self, and then we set the title, and in this case, I'm just going to say staff manager. And what we want to do then to display it is we want to go back to self form main and we do main loop. And that's basically like the show. It basically says, okay, display it now. Now I'm going to put this one, doesn't really matter where I put it, but we want it just at, we want it just, it's going to be at the end of build control. So when we're finished building and setting the position of the controls. So we can run the code at this point. And you see it compiles, we didn't get any errors, but it's not actually displaying anything. And that's because we need to create an instance. Now, one thing in Python is that we can use the same file here and we can just have code written in this file. And this can be like our test code if we want. And in this case, I'm just going to say form equals form main. And when we run this file, what happens is it goes down here. So it doesn't run a class because that doesn't make sense. But it goes down here and runs this code, and this will create the instance of the class. So let's try that now. And this has no attribute. So form has no attribute. So this one should be form main. So let me just put the form main there. And then if we run the code, you can see that it brought up our user form. So user form doesn't really show much. It's just there. And it just has the title. So that's all we've done. We've created just a very simple user form so far. So now that we've got a user form in place, what we want to do is we want to start adding some controls. So the first control we're going to have, it's going to be a frame in the top left. So I'm going to call it frame top left for easy reference. And that equals a TK frame. And so any control we create, we just have to give it its parent. So the parent is the form main. And what normally we don't really do anything else with the frame because it's just holding. It's not even going to be shown on the screen. But I want to show it on the screen in the beginning so that you can just understand where exactly it is. So I say relief equals solid. And I'll just say the border width equals 2. So border width equals 2. And that will just show it on the screen. Now, you might notice I didn't use self here, and that's because we're not going to be referencing the frame top left outside of this function. It's only going to, so it's basically a local variable. Now, we're going to create a button edit, and we'll say button edit, and we'll just say tk.button, And again, we put in its parent. Now its parent is obviously the frame in this case. So frame top left. And we want to say what the text is. So the text of this is edit. And we put a capital E there. And then we want to just say the width equals to 10. And then we can just copy this down like this. So Shift Alt and down arrow will actually just copy the line for you. And then we're going to call this one button delete. So delete. And again, it'll be the very same, except it's just got the text delete. This creates the application. So we could say here, create controls. But we also need to position the controls. So like I said, we don't have a drag and drop GUI to do it. So we use the different attributes of the controls. So let's position controls. And what we do is then we say frame top left and we say grid. So let me just explain what that means. So what you can see here is that we have a grid. And in our grid, it gets created as we add items. So the top left you can see there, which we're working on at the moment, this is going to be column 1 and row 1. When we add the frame and the drop down to the right, so the one with Cosmo in it, that's going to be row 1, column 2. And our tree view is going to be in row 2, column 2. And then the other frame and group of controls is going to be row 2, column 1. So we just basically tell Python where the position that it's going to be in the grid, and then we basically do the alignment later, and Python then figures it out. Now, this is a bit strange if you're coming from a VBA background, but when you get used to it, it's quite good because all the stuff is lined up for you. You don't have to like drag stuff around and get it to match. But it does take a bit of getting used to, admittedly. We've got our grid here, and as I said, we're going to have row equal to 1, and we're going to have column equal to 1. Now for the buttons, the button edit, these are children of the frame. So they'll actually be a grid within that frame. And so it's 1, 1 and column 1, 2. So the one thing here is that it take row and column. It's row and column aren't the first parameter. So we have to just make sure that we specify the parameters that we're using. So as I said, row 1 and column 2. So if we run this code now, you can see that it gave us the, so this should be button delete. So let me just change that. So we just got one button appearing there. Now, one useful thing in Python is that if we run this code again, what you'll see is that it actually brings up a second instance. So I've got this one here, but actually it has another one. It keeps the other one alive as well. So I can actually see the two of them here. So this is the previous one, this is the current one. And it's quite useful at times if you want to make a change, but you want to keep an eye on what the previous one looked like. So this is our form so far, very basic. We've only got one part of the grid done. So that's why everything is kind of aligned to the top left. I'm making the push for 100,000 subscribers, and I'd love your help to get there. If you've learned something new from my video, even once, then please hit subscribe. It's completely free for you, but it makes a huge difference for me and helps this channel reach more people who want to master Excel VBA and Excel Python. Now the next control that we're going to add is the TreeView, and this is the one that displays the records. What we do is we say self.tree, and this equals to one that's called a TTK. So TTK are basically kind of an add-on package to the Tkinter. So we can say from Tkinter import TTK. So it's basically more modern controls that weren't in the original one. And we're going to just add the message box here as well because we're going to be using it later. And once we have that, then we can use our TreeView. So again, we start with the parent, and the parent, of course, is the main form. That's self.form main. What we want to do then is we want to say show the headings. So they're not showed by default because we have different ways of displaying this. So we're saying show equals headings. Now what we want to do is for our columns, we want to give them IDs. We say columns equal, and this is going to be like basically column IDs. And so what our column IDs are is basically just a list of items. So column IDs equals. So in Python, we have lists which are very similar to arrays, but we declare them like this with square brackets. And then we can have a list of items in it. So I'm going to have first name, and then I'm going to have last name, and we'll have, let's say, job status. job status, and the department, because these are going to be the full ones anyway. And so what we want to do then is we want to add them to our tree. So this basically creates the column IDs, but it's not going to show anything just yet. Now down here, we're going to just put in our tree grid. So our tree, as we saw, it's going to go in position 2, 2. So just to bring that up again, our tree is going to be in this position here, which is row 2, column 2. So far we've only got row 1, column 1, and the way it works is that it just creates them as we create our grid. And we'll say grid here, row equals 2 and column also equals 2. Now what we want in our tree, as I said, we've just added the IDs, but we haven't created the headers. So we want to basically add the text to the header, so to our column header. So what we do is we say for text in column IDs. So column IDs, remember that this group above of our IDs. And for each one of those, then we want to say tree.heading, and that should be self.tree.heading. And then we want to say the column that we're referring to, that's the one in the column IDs. So let's just call this ID rather than text. So column equals ID. And then the text will be basically the text of the ID. So text equals ID as well, because just the text and the ID, they just match. And we want we want the headers to be left aligned. So we use what's called anchor equals W. So in Python, when we're basically aligning something, we use north, south, east, and west. So we use the letters for those rather than up, down, left, and right. I'm not sure the origin of that. But basically west means it'll anchor it to the left. Now we should have for in there and self back a little bit. And so that creates our headers. And then we've basically added our tree view. So let's run the code to see what we have. This should actually be small tree here. And let's run it again. And you can see that it's appeared as we expected. First name, last name, job status, department. And we've got our buttons. Now what you might be thinking at this point is that this form looks like it came from the 1900s. And it does look old because basically Tkinter started in the 1990s. But we can make things much more modern quite easily, which is the good news. So let's go ahead and do that. Now the package TTK Bootstrap that we're going to be used is not part of Anaconda, but it's quite straightforward to add it. We first of all go to Anaconda prompt, and this is our Anaconda prompt here. And once this is open, what we do is we basically just run this code, conda install conda forward bootstrap, and that will automatically install this for you. And then once it's installed, you can simply use it as another library, as we're just about to do. So we use what's called Bootstrap. So this is import TTK Bootstrap, and we'll import that as TB. Now to change the theme is so easy that it's really surprising. But all we've got to do is replace this with window. We say window, and we say the team name, and this should be TB as well, of course. Then we say team name equals, and we're going to go with the one that we're going to be using, which is superhero. If we run our code now, what we'll see is that it's changed completely from what was running a minute ago, which was this one. So you see quite a difference in the style. Now the beauty in the theme is that we've all these different ones for Python, and we can just use whichever one we want, and it'll then apply it to all the controls. So what we want to do then is we want to have a drop down, and in that drop down we want to be able to select theme on the fly, so as we're running our application. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create the frame on the right hand side. So frame on the right hand side, we'll just put it here. Here we have all the themes that we're going to use in our application, and we're going to create our frame top right. So frame top right, and that equals again tk.frame. And what's in the frame then, the first thing is, of course, that we always do self and form main. That is the frame's parent. Now then what we want to do is we want to have combo team. So this is a combo box, and we want to create a combo box. So ttk combo, and that's the tk combo box frame top right. We're going to put that in the top right. So this helps us align it to the right. What we want to say then is just what the values are of the combo box, and we just say values equals themes, which is our variable. We'll position this now, and we do it here. So after the just up before the tree, we're going to say frame, and that's going to be top right, and it's going to be grid, and it's going to be row equals 1 again, and it's going to be column equals 2. And then our self.combo theme, that's going to be basically row 1, column 1, because it's the only control within that frame. So row equals 1, column equals 1. So if we run this code now, what you'll see is that we've got our combo here. Now we want a combo aligned to the right hand side. We want it aligned over here. And what we can do then is we can basically just say sticky equals east. So remember, so when we're using grid, we use sticky, and sticky basically just means what way it aligns. If we say west, it's left, and east is right. So we want to align that to the right. And you can see now that it's in the right hand side. So we basically got like row 1, column 1, row 1, column 2. And this area is going to be, or when it's used, it's row 2, column 1. And this is row 2, column 2. Okay, so we can just close that down now. So what we're going to do now is make that combo box functional. So the first thing we want to do is we create a variable style, and that's going to store whatever the current theme is. So we set it to TB, which remember is the bootstrap. That's the one that sets the different themes. And we set our variable to equal whatever the current one is. Now let's put that up here just after we set the form main. So once we have that, then we can go down here to our combo, and we can say self.combo theme, and what we want to do is set. And we're going to set that to the current theme name. And then what we want is we want to put an event for the combo. So for the event, we just say bind, and then we're going to use what's called combo box selected. So when the combo box is selected, this will run. And what will it do? It will call self the function called theme selected, which we haven't created yet. So we'll go up here and we'll create that theme right now. We're gonna put it there. Sorry, create that function right now. It always takes a self, and it takes an event as well. So when you bind something like this, it takes an event as a parameter. So you just have to give it that event. And then we'll basically say self.style.teamUse is what we want to do. Team use. And we want to use whatever's in our combo. So in our combo team, what do we have? We just get, and that gives us the current value of the combo. So let's take a look and see what we have. We've got superhero at the moment. Let's change that to Cosmo, which is a light one. You can see that it changes it. Let's change it to flatly. Change it to united. Change it to darkly. And change it back to superhero. So you can see it's pretty sweet the way that, we can have any theme that we want by just selecting it, and it just changes everything automatically. So it's very, very useful. Now, what you might notice here is that we don't have much spacing between our controls. So we can easily add spacing by just using pad Y and pad X. So if I get the grid here, I'm just going to do a big kind of padding between them. So pad X basically means that we're putting space to the left or to the right. So in the number of pixels to the left or to the right. And let's just do 15 because it'll be more kind of apparent on the screen. And then we're going to do pad Y. So pad Y is top and bottom. So the pixels above and below. Now if we run this code again, what you'll see is that we've got more spacing. So you see that it's gone down there. So let's bring up the other one. And if we bring up the other one, then what you'll see is the difference. So it's just gone down here a little bit. Now we want to space everything out, like we want to space out the buttons and everything like that. So we can do the grid pad X, pad Y everywhere down here. But the problem with that is that it just makes the code, like you're filling your code with all the stuff. So we want to come up with an easier way to do it. And the easier way we want to do it is basically just go through all the controls and update them. So we're going to create a function, and the function is going to be called update controls. And we'll do it down here. So after we finish with everything, we'll do update controls. So self.update and underscore controls. Now, with our frame to the top right, everything is going basically to be to the west, which is to the left, and that's how we align it, except this one. So what we'll do is after all the controls are done, then we'll update our frame in the top right. So let's create our update controls up further. So we'll create our update controls up here with just above build controls. And let me get rid of this self here, and we put self into it. And what we're going to do then is we're going to say, we're going to run through everything, and we're going to say for child in, and we're going to have to put a function here, function that will go through all the controls. So a function here. So just put this here for the moment. We'll get back to that function in a moment. And we basically say if the child, so the child will be the control, if there is instance of the child, if that is the type, and it's going to be TK frame, or if it's TK TreeView. So for one of these, we'll have different spacing on it. And that spacing will do like, so child.grid configure. So grid configure is what we do after the grid is created, and grid is what we do in the beginning. So we're saying grid configure. So it just means that it will keep what we have originally, which is the positioning, and it'll just configure the default settings, which would be 0 for pad X and pad Y. And then what we'll just do here is we'll just say pad X equals, and we can say whatever value we want. So for these, we'll say 15, and then pad Y will equal to 15. So if it's not one of these, so for example, there's not one of these, if it's just a button or one of the other kind of smaller controls, what we will do is we will say child, again, grid configure, and then pad X will just be 5. So pad X equals 5 and pad Y equals 5. And what we also want to do is we want to align it to the left. So we're going to say sticky equals W, and we'll do that here as well. And that will do them all. Now that is the function update controls finished. And now what we want to do is we want to create the function that will actually return us all the controls that are on our user form. Now, if we only had controls, if we didn't have any frames, then we'd basically just say all for each control that's on our main form. But because we've got a frame and that's got children, so we've got like grandchildren, we've got to get some way of going through all the controls. So we're going to create something and we're going to call it walk widgets. So widgets being controls. And that's going to take the parent, and the parent is going to be basically the form. So we're going to call this up here. We'll call it walk dot and self, of course. So it'll be self.walk and underscore widgets. And we'll pass it the parent. And the parent that we're going to pass it then will be passed in, like it'll be the main form, but we'll pass that in when we call this one. So this one will also take parent. And if we go down to where it is, so I'll just do a control F just to find it. Or control F3, I should say. And then we'll pass form main as the parameter. So let's go back up here and update controls. And now we've got so we want to walk through the widgets. And how we do it is we basically create an empty list. So this is our empty list like this. And we say for child in parent. And we want to say win info children. So that's basically how you get all the children of any control. So with basically all their children. And what we do with all their children then is we just added our list. So we say widget append child. So every child that we find. Now this would all work if we had no grandchildren and we just give it the main form. This will get us all the controls, but it's just the controls like the frame that had other children that we need. So with those, we're basically saying we want to add to this. So that's extend means add a group of items. And we're going to call walk window again. So if you're not familiar with recursion, it basically is a function that calls itself. And that's how we kind of walk through things that have kind of children and so on, like trees. So we say we're going to call this on itself. So for example, if we get a frame, what we'll do is we'll add the frame to the widget, so to the original list, and then we'll do extend here, and we'll basically say go through this frame and check its children, and then that will return a list of children if it has any. and these will be added to our main list. So that's basically all it's doing. And then finally, when we're finished, what we want to do then is we just want to return the widgets. So it's just returning a list of the controls. And that list of controls then we'll use above. So let's run this code and just see if it works as we expect. Now we've got one small error here. It's missing. Sorry, I called walk windows or walk widgets. I call it a second time and I never put in the parent. So the parent here is obviously going to be child. And if they had any great grandchildren, it'd work as well, but they don't, so we don't need to worry about that. But basically, that's the way that it goes through all the controls. And you can see that they're all spaced out. The edit and delete button have a space between them. And you can see there's a space between the top and the bottom of the tree view and between the tree view and the edge of the form. And even the tree view and the bottom of the form. Now, I don't need the frame at the top anymore to be visible. So I'm going to get rid of that. So I'm going to go relief equals solid. So this is the top left one, and I'm just going to get rid of this. So we don't need this anymore. Now what we want to do is we want to place values in our tree view. And we'll create a function to do that up at the top. So we're going to have refresh tree, and this is a function that we're going to be using in a few places. So anytime that we do any kind of delete or add, we want to refresh the tree with the new records. And so we'll create this down here, and again, it's just going to be def refresh 3. It's going to take self, and we give it the colon. Now, what we want to do, first of all, is we want to delete all the items in the tree. So we've got a delete function. So self tree and delete. So we're going to delete all the items. And then we're going to have for record in some kind of list, because it's going to take a list. And then within that, we're going to do self.tree, and that's going to do an insert. So delete all the items, then go through all the records and add and insert the items. So that's all we've got to do. So to delete from the tree, we need delete takes a group of IDs. That means that we need to get the IDs of all the items in the table, and we do so using the method getChildren. Now, one thing with the delete function is when we do the getChildren here, this is going to give us back a list of the IDs. So like 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we've got all the IDs, say here like this, but actually delete doesn't take a list. It actually takes all the IDs as parameters. So you can see we need to convert the list into the parameters. And the way we do it is very simple. We just use an asterisk like this, and it does what we call unpacking, converts a list into parameters. So quite easy. So now we want to have a couple of test lists until we actually start getting the real data back. So we'll just say John here and say Smith, and he is part-time and he works in IT. So let's copy him, and then we'll delete him and just put him up in here. And then we'll change this to Jane, and she's going to be Jones, and she's going to work in finance. And that will give us back basically the records one at a time. So the record being the row. So when we insert into our tree view, because we don't have any parents, we're just treating it like a list view. We're inserting at the top row, or what we say, like at the parent level. And we want to add at the end. Although our tree view is always going to be empty, but we use end anyway. And that's the position we want to add it. And then basically the record. So the values are going to be equal to record, whatever's in the record. So then we run the code, it'll build the controls and refresh the tree. Now, one thing we have in build controls is we've got it calling the main loop. And this is what we do after we're finished all our initialization. We basically say, do the main loop. So we're going to put this up here where it's like not buried, so we can see exactly where it is. So now let's try and run this code and see how we get on. And you can see that it placed the values in our tree view. We've got John Smith and Jane Jones. So this is really good. We know that our tree view is working. And then we know if we give it data in the form of a list of lists, basically a list of rows, we know that it will place the right data in our tree view. So now we want to create the data layer. And this is basically the class that's going to deal with all the data in our Excel sheet. So when you're writing like really nicely designed code, one of the most basic things to do is that you would separate the user interface from how we get data. And this means in the future, it's easy to swap, say, our user interface. If we do a different user interface, we don't have to worry about the data side of things. And if we change how we get the data, then we don't have to worry about the GUI side of things, provided that, you've kept the code separate and that it runs pretty nice. So just to create this layer is quite simple. We basically just create a new file, and it's going to be called data layer, and it's going to have a new class in it. And that class, again, is going to just get the data. So we've got our class here, and we'll work on this now. And the way we'll do it is we'll start by having called data layer. And again, we'll have our initialization function. And what that will do then is we'll start with the file name. Now the file name is in the current file. We've kept it very simple here. So it's just staff data.xl. And what we want to do then is we want to say load the data. So self.load the data. And then we'll write that function. We'll say load data. And that will take self. And then what we want to do is we want to set the book. So the book is going to equal, and we're going to use openpyxl. So openpyxl, if you're not familiar with it, is basically a class that allows us to interact with closed Excel files. So we don't have to open the file, and we're not dealing with Excel. We're just dealing with files that are closed. Now we're going to use openpyxl here. So we say openpyxl, and we want to load the workbook. Now, when we load the workbook, it's important to understand that it's loaded into memory. And if we make any changes, it doesn't change the workbook. It just changes in memory. It's only when we save it that it writes it back. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Now, we want to get access to two worksheets as well. So we say we're going to call this one staff, which is the main one. And we'll assign that to a worksheet. So in other words, we get the book, which is our workbook. And we basically just say, give us the worksheet called staff. And the same thing for lookup. And lookup is just going to have a list of departments in a table. And again, that's just lookup. So this gives us the worksheets we want from the workbook. Sometimes we'll call load data, and we don't want to keep loading the data all the time, because sometimes we've loaded the data and we don't want to load it each time, because if we had 100,000 records or something, it wouldn't be that efficient. So what we'll have is we'll basically have an is loaded. So for example, we'll use this. And we'll say self, and we'll say is loaded. And we'll set that to equal to false. And what we'll do then is when we come in here, we basically say if it's not loaded already, then load it. So if not is loaded, we then want to load it. If it is already loaded, then we'll just use the loaded version. And then at the end, when it's loaded, we just say self.isLoaded equals true. So it just means we're not loading it more than the one time. Now, once we have the data loaded, what we want to do then is we want to get the data. So we'll say def, and we'll say get data. So get data. And then this will return the data that we want. First of all, we call self load data, which we just created. And so if this is the first time, it'll load the data into our memory. So it'll put it into book and staff and lookup. If it's already loaded, then it won't do anything because it's already in those variables. Now we set our list to be an empty list. And then what we do is we go through the items. So we say for row in, and we say sheet staff. And this allows us to go through the rows. So we basically say sheet staff, and that should have self in front of it so that we recognize it. And then iter rows is basically just giving us back a list of rows. And what's really neat with this, we don't have it in VBA, is we can say the minimum row, the row we want to start with, and that's 2 because we're skipping the header. And we say values only equals true. So we only want values. We don't want anything else. And then basically we just say to our list, just append basically the row, which is what we got back. And that's it. And then we just return the data. So what we're going to do is write some really simple tests here. And this will make our life easier, because by the time we use this code, use these calls like in our user interface, the code, we already know that they work pretty well. So all we do here is we say data equals data layer. So this creates an instance of our class. So just think of like an object in VBA, like a sheet, worksheet or something. They're all objects. So this is just an object. And we say then data, get the data. And we want to see if this works. So we'll just do a print, and then we'll just run our code and just see if this worked okay. And if it worked okay, we should get a list of the data. So it's complaining there's a problem with one of the lines. So append row, it doesn't like. And yes, so that should have been, so I'm calling the function, so that should have been round parentheses rather than the square ones. So that's why it's good to run it from here, because we'll get the errors very easily by running it here. We don't need to run up the user face, click certain buttons to get to this point. Now you can see it printed out all the different things on our worksheet. Now, one thing about this is that, you know, it's quite ugly to look at it like this. So what we can do here is we can do basically like a simple import pp print. And this just, and I'm going to say as pp. And this allows us then to do a simple pp.pprint. And all that does is it prints it out in a nice format. So if I run this again, what we'll see is that you can see now that it's printed it out like in a very nice format. And these are all the records from our spreadsheet. So if we open our spreadsheet, you'll be able to see that the first one is Carol Morales, and we've got Troy Nelson and so on down to John Smith at the end. So if I run this code from here, it will run these 3 lines, and that's fine. That's what we want. But the problem is if I run this from the user interface, so if I call this from the user interface, it'll actually run these lines. And we don't want to, because these are just like our test lines. So what we can do is we can say if, and we do underscore name, and we say if the name of it is main, this means that we ran it from here. So this is the main file basically. We ran it from here. So if we run it from here, yes, we do want these lines to run. If we run it from somewhere else, so if we call it from our main form, then these lines won't run. So this is really, really useful. And now what we can do next then is we can basically add we can add more code. So let's do the get header. So we've got the get data. So let's do the get header, which is quite similar in a way. So we do the get, and again it takes self. And then what we want to do is, first thing as always, we do self.load data. And let me just pull that up the screen a bit. And so I'm going to show you some cool Python code, but first of all, let's do this the way we would normally do it. So we'd normally say data equals empty list. And then we say for cell in self.staff. And we want the first row, which we can say is 1. So for the first row, what we want to do is we want to append what's in the cell. So data.append and what's in our cell. So cell.value. And then we want to return that data. And so this will get the header fine. So let's actually do it down here. And I'm going to comment out this line and we'll just print the header. Now we can just print the header as normal because the header doesn't have any, it just has 1 row. So let's try our get header and see if it worked. And you can see that it did. It has first name, last name, job status, and department. So you can see that it worked correctly. But we can write this code actually a little bit neater. What we can do instead of this, we can put it all in one place. We can say return. So this is basically saying I want my result returned as a list. And we can say then we can put in our for loop like this, for cell. So go through the for loop. So basically I'll just copy and paste this. So we go through this for loop. And in this for loop, what do I want? I want the cell value. So I put the cell value before that. And then this line here is basically equivalent to these 4 lines here. So it creates the list, and within that it does the for loop, and it knows to put this into the list. So we don't need like data append, and we don't need the data here. We're just basically doing all this in the list. And so that's like a cool Python way of doing it. So we can get rid of this. And of course we want to check that it worked. And you can see that it did. It printed out the header in the bottom there. So you can see that it worked fine. So this is just like a kind of a neat way of doing Python. Okay, so now we've done all this work, it's actually pretty easy to add the remaining functions to our data layer. The next function we're going to add is getDepartments, which, as the name suggests, will return a list of departments. Now this is different than the previous functions in that we are now retrieving data from an Excel table. So for our getDepartments function, the first thing we need is the address of the table. And we can get that with this code. We say table address equals sheet lookup dot table, and then we give it the table name. So it's similar to using list objects in VBA. Once we have the table, we can then get the reference to the address by adding .ref. And this is the table function that returns the address of the range of the table. And then, just like we did earlier, we can loop through the cells. So we'll do a simple for loop here. And what this does is it goes to all the cells in the table's range and returns the value. And we've just one column in the table, so this is pretty straightforward. So one thing I should have here is that when I did this, I left out the table. So obviously that's a table, and we need to specify that as a table, just like a list object in VBA. And then what we do is we return the result. So let's try this now and just see what we get. And you can see that it returned everything. Department, Finance, HR. Now, of course, we want to get rid of the header. We don't want to have the header in it. So this is what we do. So we're returning a list of values. And what the one colon does is it basically says, give me all the values in the list from position 1 to the end. It's what we call slicing. So far, we've added functions that have retrieved data from our worksheet. Now we want to add functions that will update the data in our worksheet. So the first one we're going to write is going to be add record. And that will take a record as a parameter, and that record is simply a list of lists. So it's a list of rows. And then what we want to do is we want to append the record. So we basically just get our worksheet and we use the append function, which is similar to the append function for a list. And we append record. And after we do this, of course, we want to save so that it writes this data from memory back to our workbook. And that's all we have to do for our add record function. So this is our save function. And the reason we have a save function is because in certain cases, what's going to happen is somebody's going to have the workbook open. And in that case, we're going to get an error because we're trying to update a workbook that's already open. So we want to give that error back to our user interface. So we use a try. So try in VBA is basically on error, go to some label. But we do try, and then the label is going to be accept. And then we put our code in between. So we're going to do self.book and we do save. And save is basically just we save the file name. So this just writes everything from memory back to our file. So we've got our accept here, and what we'll have is we'll have a permission error. So we're looking for the permission error. So this will occur if the workbook is open already. And when that occurs, we don't want to give an error here. So we don't want to do a message box at this point because this is our data layer. This just deals with data. So we don't have anything in here talking to the user. So what we do instead is we raise an error and we let the layer above catch that error, and then that can display the error to the user. So we just basically say runtime error and we put in whatever text is. The workbook is already open. Please close and try again. We basically raise the error and we say from E. That will then create that error and throw it up. So if we try to add now, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a data.add record. And of course, we'll have a test record here. We'll say record equals, and we can go back to our main form. And let's just take Jane Jones here. So record equals this. And then what we do is we just pass it the record. And let's run the code and see what happens. So the workbook, it's given me that error. The workbook is already open. Try again. So it basically just threw that error, but it didn't it won't do anything with it, obviously. And what we want to do then is we're just going to close this, and then we'll run it again now with it closed. And if it doesn't give us back an error, we'd presume that it worked. But of course, we're always going to check that it worked. And if we look at it now, you can see that Jane Jones is here at the end. So it actually worked perfect. Now the next thing we want to do is the delete record. Again, delete record, another one where we're updating the worksheet. So delete record takes self and it takes the row index, so the row that we're going to delete. Now obviously at the end we want to do a save as well, and we want to have that error appearing if we can't save it, if it's already open. And then the delete is quite easy. It's just self. We get the workbook and we say delete rows. Then we pass the row index and we add 1 so as to skip the header. Now let's add some code to test this. And what we want to do is we're going to print all the data again after we do it. So we'll put this line back in and we'll do data dot delete record. We're going to delete record 1 and that's Carol Morales. Now if this works, it should print out all the records without her in it. And we can look here and we can see that she's gone. So Troy Nelson is there. Let's delete number 10. And it's always good to delete, like to try things. So to delete the first record, delete the last record, because bugs tend to exist at the borders. So here we go. And you can see there's only one Jane Jones. So we've deleted the one that wasn't there. So we've only one more thing to do then with our data, and our data is completely finished. And what you'll notice is we haven't actually gone anywhere near our user interface. So we're going to get all this working perfect. And by the time we give it to our user interface, we should have all our 99% of the bugs gone out of it. And if we do have problems in the future, we can just come back here and run our tests and see where they are. So let's update the data. And updating the data takes a record. And this is the trickiest of them all, because adding is just adding to the end, deleting is just deleting. Here, what we want to do is we want to find the record. And then when we find the record, we want to update that particular record. So for row in, and we say self staff. So we're going to read through all the records. So iter rows. I'm going to start at row 2 because we don't, the header's at row 1. And we're basically saying if the first name equals the first item in the record. So if the first name is John and the first item in the record is John, and we want to do an and as well, and that's going to be, we're going to check the second name. So we're basically just comparing on names. Now normally if you were doing this you'd have an ID or something like that, but just to keep it simple, we're just going to check on names. If the names match, what do we want to do? We want to copy everything in the record. So we want to say for value in the record, and we want to somehow assign that value. So for every value in the record we want to copy it. We want to copy it in the current row at a particular position. So this is basically a for loop that's copying what's in the row, so it's going through the columns. So we want to somehow do j. Now we could do like j equals 0, and then after j, and then what we do is after this we do j equals itself, equals j plus 1 and so on. But an actual easier way to do it is that we can use enumerate, which will give us back the number. We can do for j value in enumerate. And that gives us back what it's given us back from the record, but it also gives us back the number of the item as well. So we don't need this at all. It'll do it all for us. And then obviously when we find a record, we don't want to loop through anymore because we've only got one record in theory of the same. So when we find a record and we copy it or update it, we don't need it. We don't need to look through anymore. So we just break, and then we obviously save it. So let's check the update. We've got Jane Jones. So this is the original. And we'll just keep that there so that we know what we're doing. And then we're going to do Jane Jones, and she's going to go to full time. And now she is going to be in HR. So if this works in theory, it should be update record. Just to keep it kind of consistent with what we already have. So update record. Takes the record. Let's run it and see if it worked. It doesn't like it. I've just got a small spelling mistake there. I did shelf instead of self. Shelf. So I should know by that, because you can see the coloring here. When I put that to self now, it'll turn orange or whatever you call that color. And iter rows is right as well. So that's kind of one clue. Now you can see now, after we ran this, it actually has full time in HR. So it changed Jane Jones here to HR. So we know that worked, and we can check the Excel file if we wanted. So now we've got all the stuff that we need in our data layer, and we haven't even gone near the user interface. And so all we do in the user interface is if we want to do any of these operations, we basically just call add record, delete record, update record, get departments, whatever it is. And that's all we have to do in the user interface. We don't have to worry about it working or not, because we've already tested and we know that it does. And if there's a problem, we can come back here and run through these tests and just see exactly what is it working like it should. Okay, so now we're switching back to our form main. And what we want to do is we want to add these control, we want to like do the delete, edit and save, basically, or update the record. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to put in our functions here. So we're going to have this one, and this is going to be delete, and we're going to say click. So this is our click event. So when the button is pressed, it'll do this. And then what we're going to do is just do a print of this. So print delete. And then what we want to do after we delete, we know that we're going to do the refresh tree. So every time we do this operation, we want the tree to be refreshed. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do edit and we're going to do save. So this is going to edit something. So print edit. And then this one is going to save. So when we add something, and this one is going to be saved. So whether we're going to be in two modes, we're going to be in edit mode and we're going to be in add mode. And in both modes, we'll use save click on that button that will actually save the record. So we'll see a bit more about this in a while. So we'll just do save record. And of course, after this, we want to refresh the tree. So let's change our buttons. So we go down to our build controls and we're going to change the buttons here. So button edit, and we're just going to set what the command is. Our command equals, and it equals self.edit click. And then the one down here, what that's going to equal is, it's going to equal delete. And you can see delete click is there. So by putting the command here, it just means that when you click on the button, it'll call this function. So what we want now is we want to add a couple of extra things here. So we want to add, we have our message box in place and we're going to be using the message box. So we're going to go to update, delete click. And what we're going to do here, first of all, is we're going to delete a record. So basically, when you're using a user interface, you have a click event. You don't want to put reams of code in your click event. You want to be calling stuff. So the click event is like a manager. The reason for this is that if in the future you decide to delete by, say you delete in a different way with a different control, then you're not copying all this code around. You're basically just copying you'll just basically say use delete record. Like we're going to have a delete record function. And so all you'll do is basically call delete record function. And this contains all the code. So it just makes your user interface flexible. You're not too tied to your controls, or your code isn't at least. So then we go down here and we're going to do delete record. And so def delete record. And that's going to, of course, have self in it. Just a little syntax error there. And so what we want to do first is get to selection. So what is selected in our tree view? So selection equals, and we just get tree focus. So focus is what's selected currently. And if not selection, then we want to say message box, want to show an error. And basically, we just say message. We're not going to set the title. We'll just say no item selected. Please select and try again. And that will return. So we just want to bail on this function if nothing is selected. If something is selected, we want to get the row index. Remember, the row index is what we're going to give to our data layer. And we'll say self.tree.index. And so we give it what's selected. So the selection gives us the ID. And we give the ID to the index, and the index will give us the row index. So it'll give us the number. If we click on row 1, it'll give us back row 1. If we've row 3 selected, it'll give us back the index 3. And then we can give this to our data manager. So we have self.dataManager. So the data manager doesn't exist yet. And we're going to attach the data layer, the one that we were just working on. We say import data. And now we've got access to our data layer. And what we're going to do then is we're going to say self dot, and we'll call it data manager. And this is going to equal data layer dot, and that's going to create the class. And we've got our delete record. And in our delete record, what we're going to do is have our data manager here. And so our data manager, what that's going to do is going to call delete record. So we've seen that this works already, and we're going to pass it the row index. Now, the problem with the row index here, of course, is that this index is 0 based. So the first item in the tree view, it's going to give us back 0. The second item will give us back 1, and so on. So we're going to just add 1 onto that, so that we're getting basically the actual value within the spread, like within the list of rows, like 1, 2, and so on. Now, if we run this code, what you'll see is that we have the temporary data in the tree view. And so what we want to do is we want to read the proper data from the worksheet and put that data in the tree view. So we're going to get rid of this, and we're going to put in the actual real data. So instead of this, we'll take our data layer and data we actually have our self.data manager. And what we want to do is we want to get the data, and that will fill the tree with data. So instead of having the kind of dummy data. So if we run this now, and did we get an error? We got an error there, 17. So it doesn't recognize we have the data manager. So let's just go up here and check. And yeah, so I should have the data manager. So this should be here first of all. We create this before we do anything else. And one other thing that we want to do is we want to update the headers as well. So redo the headings. You can see we have the column IDs. So, and they are the right ones actually, but what we should do is have the column IDs equal our data layer, and that's data manager. And now when we run this code, what we should do is we should get all the data. And you can see that we did. We have first name, last name, job status, and all. And we've got all the data that we expect. Now, we want to try and basically see if we can delete some of these records. So we'll take the first one here. It's always a good one. And let's click on delete. And you can see it deleted it. Now click, let's delete Jane. Xavier. We'll pick one in the middle, Julian. And you can see that it deleted all the records. So we know that our delete is working. And as I said, we didn't have to worry about anything. We basically just got the index and passed it on to our data layer. And we know that that already works. So now when we were updating our data controls, what we want to do is we want to add all the controls in so that basically that they hold the data for first name, last name, the department, and the job status. So let's add all these. Now I'm going to copy and paste all these in because there's no point kind of just sitting and letting you watch kind of me do all this. So this is the end of the tree. So I'm just going to paste them all in here. You can see it in the code when you download it anyway. And then I'm going to put in the position. So the frame center left and all this. And we're going to put in all the position controls right after the tree as well. Now, if this all worked correctly, we've one indentation error here. And let's tab that in. So let's run this code, and we should, if all has worked, you see we have all the controls there. So what we want to do is, if we have data in here and we click on add, it should add, in theory, it should add all the data to our workbook. So let's see if it does that. And our save click at the moment doesn't do anything. So we're going to call save record. So again, self.save, and that's going to save record, which we haven't created yet. And then when we're saving the record, this is going to get updated later, but when we save the record, we pass itself. And then what we do is we basically just, again, call our data manager. So our data manager dot add the record. What are we going to pass? We're going to get the data from the controls. So get data from controls. So this we're going to write this function, and it's going to get us a list from the controls. So what we want to do is return a list. We know that much. So that's our list. And what we're going to have in it then is basically like we're going to have self entry, and that's going to be first name, and we want to get the value in that. And then once we're down one, I'll just copy all these lines down. So that's the first name. The next thing that we want to do is get the last name, radio job status. And then we want to get the combo box, which is departments. So combo departments. And we just want to put commas in here. So comma there, comma here. And that's everything. So get data from controls, and we get all the data and we basically add it to the record. So that's how we're saving our record. Let's run this code and let's go Jeff Jameson. And we'll say he's in purchasing, and let's say part-time, and let's try and add him. And you can see that he was added. Now, when we add something, what we want to do is we want to clear the controls. So we want to write something that will empty the controls, which we'll get to in a moment. But what we want to do now is do an add. So when we do something here, we're in add mode, but we want to have an edit mode as well. So the first thing we'll do is create our function that does the modes. And our function is going to be called set mode. So set. And that takes the self and it takes the mode that we're setting. And then we set our variable mode equals to it. And then we do, so that equals this. And then we want to configure our button. So our add button, so this is button add, the gray one down below, we want to change that to update rather than add. So when we're in edit mode, this becomes update. And we're basically saying if mode equals edit, it's update. Otherwise, it's insert. So this is basically like the IIF function. The way we use IIF in VBA is like IIF, and then you have your condition, and if true, you do this, and if false, you do this. So it's similar to that. So text equals update, and if the mode equals edit, you do the update. Otherwise, we put insert. And basically, that's how we're just changing on the button. So now within init, what we want to do is we want to set the mode. So we want to go back up here, and in the beginning, we want to do self. We want to set mode, and so the starting mode is add. And then when we go to edit click isn't actually doing the edit. What it's doing is just setting the mode. It's just switching over. So we do self set mode, and then we're saying, okay, I want the mode to be edit now this time. So if we click on edit, it'll change the mode to edit. And then what we want to do is we want to edit the record. So edit record, which again, we haven't created yet. So we do def edit record. And again, we're passing it self. And what we want to do is we want to get the item that's selected. So selection, let me pull this up the screen a bit. So selection is going to equal self.tree and whatever is the focus. So that's the currently selected item. And again, if not selection, so I have this down here already. So basically I'm doing what we did in the delete record. No, I pre-select and try again. So basically the same. Then what I want to do is I want to empty the controls. So if there's data in there already, I want to empty the controls, EMPTY, and we're going to create that in a second. And then we're going to do a fill controls from 3. And then what we do basically is get the item that has been selected. So self.item. And the item that is selected is the one in selection, and we want just the values. So empty controls then basically just removes everything from the controls. So empty controls. And how we do that then is basically it's just all the controls. We're just basically we're removing stuff from them. Now you see down here we have all the controls. So I'm just going to copy these and I'm going to just paste them here. So we empty the entry fields using the delete function, and we set the start position to delete and where we want it to finish. And that is basically the whole entry field. We want to delete it all. We reset the radio button and we set that to be full time. And then with the combo box, if we set it to an empty string, it'll just set it back to nothing. And then the next thing that we want to do is fill the controls from the tree. So take all the data in the tree and fill the controls from that basically. Now that's going to take just self, and it's going to take a record. So each of those controls that we have here, we'll be using them again because we emptied them there, and now we want to fill them with data. And so to fill them with data, so we just, for these ones, we just do insert. So insert from 0, and what we want to insert is the record that we're getting. That should be record, and whatever the first item in the record, which is the first column on the tree view. And so last name is going to be something similar, except it's going to be 1. And then for this one, which is the job status, we're basically we just set the record. We don't need to do anything else. And for the combo departments, what we want to do, the same thing, we just do a set and we say the record, and it figures out which one, because we're using variables basically for these ones. So if all has gone good, that should work for us. So if we go down to save click here, what we also want to do here when we're saving is we want to empty the controls. So save the record, empty the controls, and then we want to do the save record. So the save record we have here already. Now, remember we did that we threw the error in the data layer. So if we can't open it, we throw this error. So we want to catch this error, the runtime error. We want to catch that up here. So if we try and close the workbook, or we try and write to the workbook and it's not closed, then we should get that error. So except, and we're looking for runtime as e. And what we'll do with that then is we'll do a message box that shows the error, .show error. And it's going to just show whatever the error is. So message equals string e. So that will give us back the error from that string. So we'll throw that and we'll catch it here, and we'll basically tell the user the file isn't open. You need to open the file to try it again. So that's adding the record. Now within our try, we basically want to say if self mode, when we try and save the record, if the self mode equals to add. Now where my self mode should have been defined set mode. So when we do the set mode, we have the self, so that should be self dot. So that didn't come up, so I knew there was an error there. And so we're basically saying if self mode equals to add, what we want to do is we want to do this one. And then if we want, we can do a message box and we can say, record was added or whatever. We don't have to do it, but if we want to. And then else, if the self mode equals edit, we want to do the same thing, but we want to update the record. So update the record will update the record rather than add it to the end. And then after this, we want to return to the add mode. So we say self, and that should be add. So after we insert the record, we want to return to the add mode. And of course, this should be update record. And so we'll save this let's take Jennifer Dunn part-time purchasing, and we'll edit her. We're going to move her to finance, and we're going to move her back to full-time. And let's try and update now. And you can see Jennifer now is full-time and she's in finance. Let's check our delete. And our delete works. We've 2 John Smiths. That was wrong, so let's delete that. And let's add somebody else as well. Insert him. And you can see John Jacob is there. So that's our fully working data entry form. If you found this video useful, then make sure to check out my video on getting started with Python for Excel. Now, if you've learned something new here, please hit subscribe and help me reach 100,000 subscribers. It really means a lot.